So we've looked at the sort of inspiration wall, and this is the sort of painting that's come out of something that I've been looking at for a while, which is the sea and what is in the sea, like yachts and sort of windsurfing. I mean, that is a sort of very weak idea, because what it essentially is, I think, is they're objects within a space, and it's sort of the composition of something, really. It's not, it has to evoke sort of an emotional response, my work, but essentially I'm looking at abstract objects, and this isn't finished yet, but it's a kind of I loved the sails because they were sort of they're abstract imagery that are sort of moving around, and each snap, if you sort of taking pictures of it or drawing it, they're all in different areas at each different time. So you've got this sort of movement happening, and various abstract paintings within one image, really, which I really find interesting. And this is the sort of, this kind of anchors it in with the white cliffs. It's not, I mean, it is of Hove, and it is like sort of off Saltdean Beach, but it's also quite universal. I think that's the thing about my work. It can be anywhere, really, like any sort of seascape. But then there's more within that, and it's about how these shapes work within a composition of something, and then the color has to be, because it's quite a simplistic painting, the colors have to be really well executed, and also the thickness of the surface is important to me. This has got lots and lots of surfaces been up behind it, and each probably painting that is behind that is maybe a different painting, but it's a process, and it's a journey between that first painting to this, and there's a percentage of that it's chance and spontaneous, and there's a lot of improvisation, but the end image has to be right, and it has to sort of there's a rightness, which Richard Diebenkorn, the artist, would say that there has to be a rightness within the composition. It has to sort of work, and that's what I'm looking for. It doesn't matter whether it's representational or abstract, it just has to be it has to sort of balance, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this one in particular. This sort of crustacean, really, of the surface, and that I almost wanted that sort of physicality of the paint to come across. If I'd have just done that painting on a canvas with nothing behind it, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't have that sort of same textural feel, the same physicality, something quite sculptural about this. There's something like you're sort of chipping away at something to create something, which I think is more sculptural than painterly sometimes, and that's what I'm sort of what I'm playing around with this image. It's not finished. There's still quite a bit to do. Each layer is sanded down, which I use the sander, which plays a really important part in my work, because it's almost like a sort of excavation of the surface. So I'm looking at what's on the surface, but what's behind the surface, and what I can kind of excavate, like a sort of archaeologist. I'm looking at what's happening beyond that, and how much I can take away, as much as how much I can add to the painting. It's really important that that there's textures and things behind that I don't know that are there. So when I kind of start scratching at the surface, there's a sort of revelatory new image that kind of comes out of it. Here's another painting that I have been. This has been a sort of a process over a year or so, really, and I definitely wanted to have one painting that I work on over a period of time, where you can almost like see, it's like a sort of animation, really, and each sort of layer is transparent. You can see how the painting progresses, And I just thought it would be quite an interesting little project for me to sort of work with. That's something sort of ticking over in the background. So I'm working on these sort of quite spontaneous works, and then I've got always this painting here that I'm kind of going back to and adding, taking away, sanding down, sort of trying to almost eliminate areas and then adding areas on. And it's sort of, it's not that thick because a lot of things have been sanded down, but there is a lot of paint on there, which, and like there's definitely sort of these sort of surface areas where it's more of a billboard, or it's something you'd find in the street, where I'm fascinated with sort of textures on walls and textures on floors, and in quite industrial things where things have happened. It's not in an artistic way, like sort of workmen have come along and sort of sprayed something on the floor, and or they've stenciled something and it's been left and then it's been sort of rubbed away slightly. And this is kind of these sort of sharp lines against something that is more deliberate, and then something that is less deliberate and a more chance aspect. So I'm kind of playing around with those two elements really, and that sort of contrast and the juxtaposition between the two elements happening. And they're either complementary, or they're sort of there's a friction. They're sort of fighting against each other, and the painting evolves quite organically, and there's something, these mountains here didn't exist until reasonably recently. There's houses that I've accentuated, and there's fields here and trees, but they, at some parts they weren't there, and then they appear, and sometimes I'll accentuate them, and then other times I'll sort of take them away. And I quite like that sort of movement, and there's this sort of travel going on. There's a journey going on within this static rectangle, really, and it will on go until there'll be a point in which I'll say, there's enough has happened to it now. But at the moment, it's an ongoing project. Is a painting from one of the photographs. It kind of loosely based on one of the photographs that I have in my studio, and it's been an image, quite an iconic image for me. It's the main image is from when we were traveling to Turkey, probably about 15 years ago, and we stopped off. And there was a sort of pool on the side, and the guy we had a taxi driver, and he basically started making this kebab, and there was this sort of beautiful scenery with this mountain in the background, this road going off into the distance. I like that sort of sense of escape and that sort of symbolism within the work, sort of allegorical aspects that that it presented. Really, it was quite simplistic. You've got the mountain, which is again something that is always sort of not too distant from my work anyway, and then you've got these sort of signs that are suggestive of something going on, or someone, like they're messages maybe of something, or someone telling you to do things. But the mountains are sort of, for me, this sort of terrain. They symbolize maybe a kind of an aspect of life in itself, of like you're trying, the kind of the hardship of life. You're kind of going up these mountains, so you're going beyond that, and you're going to the top of the mountain, which is really interesting to me. But the painting itself is, there's an abstraction to it, and I think there's these surfaces which again I'm kind of sanding down and trying to like excavate the surface, like I was in the other work, and I'm trying to sort of really dilute it down into its sort of barest elements. So the road is quite an abstract shape. these signs are abstracted, and the mountain is this sort of quite a psychedelic actually mountain at the top, which that has only just happened really this week, where this painting's been sat in my studio for quite a few months, and I've kind of really I put the face in my studio and I forget about it deliberately for a long process of time, and I'll get it out and I'll look at it for over long periods, and I'll be like, what am I going to do with it? And I sort of really sanded this back bit down, and then sort of started adding these colours, and it's it's become an abstract shape really, but I've had to try. It was in two bits. There was this sort of area up here and this area down here, and I was trying to sort of blend the two together, and I was really having trouble with sort of struggling with doing it, and it came about very quickly in the end, out of a lot of deliberation. But yeah, we've come to this point really. I'm happy with it. It's definitely finished. So yeah. This is a painting that is, I think, basically is a sort of beginning of a new project that I'm working on. It's called Abandoned Villa, this particular painting, but obviously through lockdown we've not been able to sort of go anywhere, and I imagined what these sort of resorts were looking like after they're sort of slightly disused, debilitated, decaying grandeur of these villas that are in these mountains, and they're not being used. They're sort of discarded objects, these sort of geometric white objects within the mountains. And this is particularly Spain, even though it's kind of it's abstracted, but I'm trying to use the sort of colours of Spain, but it's mainly from my imagination really, and it depicts this villa, which at one stage would have been this, very grand place, and it's sort of starting to decay. Using my normal techniques of sanding it down, I quite like these sort of elements that were left here, and then sort of using the white to kind of cover areas, so it kind of gives this aspect of something falling apart slightly, something decaying. And nature sort of taking over really, and I think I quite like that aspect of nature wins overall kind of mentality. The mountains, it's a rugged atmosphere and environment out there in Spain. It's an arid environment, so I really enjoy painting the harsh environment.